Shall we continue with the Count of Monte Cristo? Hang on a second, what are we on? Yes, there we go. Chapter 102. Valentine. The nightlight continued to burn on Valentine's mantelpiece, exhausting the last drops of oil still floating on the water. Already the alabaster of the shade was reddening, and a brighter flame flared up, crackling with those last sparks that represent, in inanimate objects, the final death throes, so often compared to those of poor human creatures. A faint, sinister light cast an opal hue over the white curtains and sheets on the young woman's bed. All sound from the street, for once, was hushed, and the silence was dreadful. Now it was that the door to Edouard's room opened, and a head which we have already seen appeared in the mirror opposite the door. It was Madame de Villefort, coming to see the effect of her potion. She stopped on the threshold, listened to the crackling of the lamp, the only sound audible in this room which appeared to be unoccupied. Then she went cautiously over to the bedside table to see if Valentine's glass was empty. It was still 1/4 full, as we said. Madame de Villefort took it and emptied it into the fireplace, stirring the ashes to ensure that the liquid was absorbed. Then she carefully washed the glass, wiped it with her own handkerchief, and put it back on the bedside table. If anyone had been watching and able to see inside the room, they would have observed Madame de Villefort's reluctance to look at Valentine or to go over to the bed. The gloomy light, the silence, and the awful poetry of night had no doubt combined with the fearful poetry of her conscience. The poisoner was afraid to see her work. At length she did pluck up courage, drew back the curtain, leant on the head of the bed, and looked at Valentine. The young woman was no longer breathing, and her teeth, half clenched, did not give out a single trace of that respiration which indicates life. Her pale lips had ceased to tremble. Her eyes, drowning in a violet mist that seemed to have seeped beneath the skin, formed a whiter protuberance where the orb swelled beneath the lid, and her long black lashes were outlined against skin that was already as dull as wax. Madame de Villefort looked at this face with an expression that was eloquent in its passivity. Then she grew bolder, and, lifting the blanket, put her hand to the young woman's heart. It was silent and icy cold. All that she could feel beating was the pulse in her own fingers. She shuddered and drew back her hand. Valentine's arm was hanging out of the bed. This arm, from the shoulder to the elbow, appeared to have been modelled on that one of Germaine Pilon's 3 Graces, but the forearm was slightly deformed by a contraction of the muscles, and the wrist, so pure in shape, was resting on the walnut table, slightly stiffened, with the fingers spread. There was a bluish tinge at the base of the fingernails. For Madame de Villefort there could be no further doubt. Everything was over. The dreadful task, the last she had to carry out, had finally been accomplished. There was nothing further for the poisoner to do in the room. She withdrew with such care that it was evident she was afraid of the sound of her feet on the carpet. Yet even as she went she still kept the curtain lifted, taking in the scene of death, which exercises an irresistible attraction when death is not decomposition but only immobility, and, so long as it remains a mystery, does not yet inspire disgust. The minutes passed. Madame de Villefort could not let go of the curtain which she was holding like a shroud over Valentine's head. She was paying her tribute to reflection. But reflection, in the case of crime, should be remorse. At that moment the spluttering of the nightlight doubled. At the noise, Madame de Villefort shuddered and let the curtain fall. The nightlight went out, and the room was plunged into terrifying darkness. The poisoner, fearful at these successive disturbances, groped her way to the door and returned to her own room with her forehead bathed in anxious sweat. Darkness continued for a further 2 hours. Then, bit by bit, pallid daylight entered into the room, filtering through the slats of the blinds, and still, bit by bit, it filled out and restored colour and shape to objects and bodies. It was at this moment that the nurse could be heard coughing on the stairway, and the woman came into Valentine's room, carrying a cup. To a father or a lover, the first glance would have been enough. Valentine was dead. But to this hired servant she seemed merely asleep. "Good," she said, going over to the bedside table. "She's drunk part of her medicine. The glass is 2/3 empty." Then she went to the fireplace, relit the fire, settled into her chair, and, although she had just got out of bed, took advantage of Valentine's sleep to catch a few more minutes of slumber herself. She was woken by the clock striking 8. It was only now that she felt surprised at the young woman's persistent sleep, and frightened by the arm hanging out of the bed, which was still in the same position as before. She went over to the bed and noticed the cold lips and icy breast. She tried to put the arm next to the body, but the arm only responded with a dreadful stiffness that was unmistakable for someone accustomed to caring for the sick. She gave a horrid cry, then ran to the door, shouting, "Help! Help!" "Help? Why help?" Monsieur d'Avrigny's voice replied from the foot of the stairs. This was the time when the doctor usually arrived. "What? Why help?" Vifor's voice exclaimed as he hurried out of his study. "Doctor, did you hear someone shout help?" Yes, let's go up," d'Avrigny said. "Quickly, to Valentine's room." But before the doctor and the father had entered, the servants, who were on the same floor, in the rooms or the corridors, had rushed into the room, and, seeing Valentine pale and motionless on her bed, threw up their hands and staggered as if overcome by dizziness. "Call Madame de Villefort! Wake up, Madame de Villefort!" the Crown Prosecutor cried at the door of the room, apparently not daring to enter. But the servants, instead of replying, were watching Monsieur d'Avrigny, who had come in, rushed over to Valentine and lifted her in his arms. "Now her," he muttered, letting her fall back on the bed. Oh, God, when will you tire of this?" Villefort rushed into the room. "What are you saying? My God!" he cried, raising both hands to heaven. Doctor! "I am saying that Valentine is dead," d'Avrigny replied in a solemn voice, and one that was dreadful in its solemnity. Monsieur de Villefort went down as though his legs had been broken under him, and fell with his head on Valentine's bed. At the doctor's words and the father's cry, the servants fled in terror, muttering oaths. Down the stairs and along the corridors one could hear their running steps, followed by a commotion in the courtyard, then silence. The noise faded. From the highest to the lowest, they had deserted the accursed home. At this moment, Madame de Villefort pushed back the door curtain, her arm half inside her morning robe. For a moment she remained on the threshold, looking questioningly at those around and summoning a few reluctant tears to her aid. Suddenly she took a step, or rather she leapt forward, her arms extended towards the table. She had just seen d'Avrigny bending curiously over it and picking up the glass which she was sure she had emptied during the night. But the glass was 1/3 full, just as it had been when she emptied the contents into the fireplace. The spectre of Valentine herself rising up before her poisoner would have produced a less startling effect on her. It was indeed a liquid of the same colour as the one she had poured into Valentine's glass, and which Valentine drank. It was indeed that poison which could not deceive Monsieur d'Avrigny, which Monsieur d'Avrigny was examining attentively. It was undoubtedly a miracle performed by God, so that, despite the murderess's precautions, a trace, a proof, should remain to denounce her crime. However, while Madame de Villefort had remained motionless like a statue of terror, and Villefort, his head buried in the sheets of the deathbed, saw nothing of what was happening around him, d'Avrigny went across to the window to make a closer ocular examination of the contents of the glass, and to taste a drop on the end of his finger. "Ah, it's not brucine any more," he muttered. "Let's see what this is." He went over to one of the wardrobes in Valentine's room, which had been converted into a medicine chest, and, taking a phial of nitric acid out of its little silver compartment, he poured a few drops into the opal liquid, which immediately changed into half a glass of crimson blood. "Ah!" said d'Avrigny, with the horror of a judge learning the truth, and, at the same time, the joy of the scientist who elucidates a problem. For a moment Madame de Villefort staggered, her eyes at first darting fire, then becoming dull. She reached unsteadily for the door-handle and went out. A moment later there was the distant sound of a body falling to the ground. But nobody took any notice of it. The nurse was examining the chemical sample, while Villefort was still insensible. Only d'Avrigny had watched Madame de Villefort and noticed her hurried exit. He raised the curtain in front of the door to Valentine's room, and, looking through that of Edouard, he could see into Madame de Villefort's apartment. He saw her stretched, motionless on the floor. "Go and see to Madame de Villefort," he said to the nurse. "She is unwell." "But what about Mademoiselle Valentine?" she asked. "Mademoiselle Valentine has no further need of help," d'Avrigny said. "Mademoiselle Valentine is dead." "Dead! Dead!" Villefort exclaimed in a paroxysm of suffering all the more acute for being quite new, unknown, and unexpected in this heart of bronze. "Dead, you say?" cried a third voice. Who said that Valentine was dead?" The two men turned around, and at the door saw Morel standing, pale, frightful, devastated with horror. This is what had happened. Morel had arrived at his usual time through the little door leading to Noirtier's. Unusually, he found the door open, and, not needing to ring, came in. In the hall he waited for a moment, calling for a servant who would show him up to old Noirtier's rooms. But no one replied. As we know, the servants had deserted the house. That day, Morel had no particular reason for anxiety. He had Monte Cristo's promise that Valentine would live, and up to now that promise had been faithfully kept. Every evening the Count had given him good news, which was confirmed the next day by Noirtier himself. However, on this morning the silence seemed odd. He called a second, then a third time, but there was no reply, so he decided to go up. Noirtier's door was open, like the rest. The first thing he saw was the old man in his armchair. His dilated pupils seemed to express an inner terror that was confirmed by the strange pallor that had spread across his face. "How are you, monsieur?" the young man said, not without some sinking in his heart. "Well," the old man replied with a wink, "well," but the anxiety on his face seemed to increase. "You are worried," Morel went on. "Do you need something? Shall I call one of your people?" "Yes," Noirtier went. Morel hung on the bell-pull, but even though he tugged it to breaking point, no one came. So he turned back to Noirtier. The pallor and anguish had increased on the old man's face. "My God," said Morel, "why does no one come? Is someone sick in the house?" Noirtier's eyes seemed to be bulging out of their sockets. "But what is wrong?" Morel went on. "You are frightening me. Valentine! Valentine!" Yes, yes, Nortier indicated. Maximilien opened his mouth to speak, but his tongue could not form any sound. He staggered and held on to the panelling to support himself. Then he reached out towards the door. Yes, 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 the old man continued. Maximilien plunged down the little staircase, covering it in 2 leaps, while Nortier's eyes seemed to shout at him, "Faster, faster!" It took the young man only a minute to cross through several rooms, empty like the rest of the house, and reach Valentine's apartments. He did not need to push the door to her room, which was already wide open. The first sound that he heard was a sob. As if through a cloud, he saw a black shape kneeling and buried in a confused mass of white linen. Fear, a dreadful fear, kept him frozen at the door. It was then that he heard a voice say, "Valentine is dead," and a second voice, like an echo, reply, "Dead, dead." Chapter 103. Maximilien. Villefort got up, almost ashamed at being discovered in this extremity of grief. The awful profession he had exercised for the past 25 years had made him more or less than a man. His eyes, after wandering for a moment, settled on Morel. "Who are you, monsieur?" he asked. "Have you forgotten that one does not enter a house that is occupied by death? Begone, monsieur, begone!" But Morel remained motionless, unable to take his eyes off the frightful spectacle of the rumpled bed with the figure lying on top of it. "Go, do you hear?" Villefort cried, while d'Avrigny came forward to oblige Morel to leave. Morel looked in distraction at the body, the 2 men, the whole room. He seemed to hesitate for a moment and opened his mouth. Then, finding no word to say, despite the vast swarm of deadly thoughts swirling in his brain, he retreated, plunging his fingers through his hair, so that Villefort and d'Avrigny, momentarily distracted from the matter uppermost in their minds, looked after him with an expression that meant, "He is mad." However, in less than 5 minutes they heard the staircase creak beneath some considerable weight, and saw Morel, who, with superhuman strength, was lifting Nortier's chair in his arms, bringing the old man up to the 1st floor of the house. When he got to the top of the stairs, Morel put the chair down and pushed it quickly into Valentine's room. The whole of this operation was carried out with a strength increased 10 times by the young man's frenzied hysteria. But the most terrifying thing was Nortier's face as it advanced towards Valentine's bed, pushed by Morel. Nortier's face, in which the intellect exerted every means within its power, and the eyes concentrated all their strength to compensate for the loss of the other faculties. This pale face, with its blazing look, was a terrifying apparition to Villefort. Each time that he found himself in contact with his father, something dreadful happened. "See what they have done!" Morel cried, one hand still resting on the back of the chair which he had just pushed up to the bed, and the other outstretched towards Valentine. "Look, father, look!" Villefort shrank back a step and stared with amazement at this young man, who was almost unknown to him, yet who called Nortier his father. At that moment the old man's whole soul seemed to rise into his eyes, which were shot with blood. Then the veins on his neck swelled, and a bluish tint, like that which suffuses the skin of an epileptic, spread across his neck, his cheeks, and his temples. The only thing that was missing from this internal explosion of the whole being was a cry. But that cry seemed to emerge, as it were, from every pore, terrifying in its dumbness, heart-rending in its silence. d'Avrigny rushed over to the old man and made him sniff a powerful revulsive. "Monsieur," Morel exclaimed, grasping the paralysed man's inert hand, "they ask me what I am and what right I have to be here. You know the answer. Tell them, Tell them!" And his voice was drowned in sobs. As for the old man, his chest heaved as he gasped for breath. One might have imagined that he was prey to the convulsions that precede the death agony. Finally, tears poured from his eyes. He was more fortunate than the young man, who could only sob without weeping. His head could not bow, so he closed his eyes. "Tell them," he said in a strangled voice. "Tell them I was her fiancé. Tell them that she was my noble friend, my only love on this earth. Tell them that this body belongs to me." The young man, presenting the awful spectacle of some great force breaking, fell heavily to his knees beside the bed, while his fingers clasped it convulsively. His grief was so touching that d'Avrigny turned away to hide his emotion, and Villefort, asking for no further explanation, drawn by the magnetism that drives us towards those who have loved those for whom we grieve, offered the young man his hand. But Morel could see nothing. He had grasped Valentine's ice-cold hand, and, unable to weep, was groaning and biting the bedclothes. For some time nothing could be heard in the room other than this conflict of sobs, oaths, and prayers. Yet one noise rose above all, and that was the harsh, harrowing sound of breathing, which at each gulp of air seemed to break one of the springs of life in Noirtier's chest. Finally, Villefort, the most self-possessed of all, after having, as it were, ceded his place for some time to Maximilien, began to speak. "Monsieur," he told Maximilien, "you loved Valentine, you say. You were her fiancé. I must admit I was unaware of this love and of the engagement. Yet, as her father, I forgive you for it, since I can see that your grief is great, true, and real. Moreover, my own grief is too great to leave room in my heart for anger. But, as you see, the angel for whom you longed has left this earth. She no longer needs the adoration of men. She who at this moment is adoring the Lord. So say your farewells, monsieur, to these sad remains that she has left behind among us. Once more take the hand that you were expecting to take in other circumstances, and part from her forever. Valentine no longer has need of anyone except the priest who will bless her." "You are wrong, monsieur," Morel exclaimed, rising on one knee, his heart smitten by a pain sharper than any he had yet felt. "You are wrong. Valentine, having died as she has, needs not only a priest, but an avenger. You send for the priest, Monsieur de Villefort. I shall be her avenger." "What do you mean, monsieur?" Villefort murmured, quaking at this new product of Morel's delirium. "What I mean," Morel continued, "is that there are two men in you, monsieur. The father has wept enough. Let the crown prosecutor resume his duties." Noirtier's eyes shone, and d'Avrigny came over to them. "Monsieur," the young man went on, his eyes picking up every feeling that was expressed on the faces of those around him, "I know what I am saying, and you all know as well as I do what I mean. Valentine was murdered." Villefort bent his head. d'Avrigny took another step. Noirtier moved his eyes. "So, monsieur," Morel continued, "nowadays, when a creature, even one less young, even one less beautiful, even one less adorable than Valentine, such a creature does not disappear violently from the earth without someone asking for a reason. Come, monsieur," Morel added with growing vehemence. "No pity. Prosecutor, I am reporting the crime to you. Find the murderer." And his implacable eyes were fixed on Villefort, while he, for his part, looked from Noirtier to d'Avrigny and back. "Yes," went the old man. "Yes, indeed," said Daphne. Monsieur, Villefort replied, trying to struggle against these three wills and against his own feelings. You are wrong. No crimes are committed in my house. Fate has struck. God is trying me, which is horrible to believe, but no one is being murdered. Noirtier's eyes flashed, and Davrigny opened his mouth to speak. But Morel lifted his hand to order silence. I tell you that people are being murdered here, he cried, his voice lowered without losing any of its dreadful power. I tell you that this is the fourth victim struck down in 4 months. I tell you that 4 days ago someone already tried to poison Valentine, and that the attempt only failed because of the precautions taken by Monsieur Noirtier. I tell you that the dose was doubled, or that the type of poison was changed, and this time the attempt succeeded. And finally, I tell you that you know all this as well as I do, because this gentleman warned you, as a doctor and as a friend. Oh, you are delirious, Villefort cried, vainly trying to escape from the trap that he felt closing in on him. I am delirious, Morel cried. Well then, I appeal to Monsieur d'Avrigny himself. Ask him, monsieur, if he still remembers the words he spoke in your garden, the garden of this very house, on the evening when Madame de Saint-Méran died, and when the two of you, thinking yourselves alone, were discussing that tragic death, in which the fate you mentioned, and God, whom you unjustly accuse, could only have played one part, that is, in creating Valentine's murderer. Villefort and Davrigny looked at one another. Yes, remember, said Morel, those words, which you thought you entrusted to silence and solitude, reached my ears. Certainly, that very evening, seeing Monsieur de Villefort's culpable leniency towards his own family, I should have revealed everything to the authorities. I should not then be an accomplice in your death, Valentine, my beloved Valentine. But the accomplice will become the avenger. This fourth murder is flagrant and visible to all, and Valentine, even if your father abandons you, I swear that I will pursue your murderer. This time, as though nature had finally taken pity on this strong constitution about to be crushed by its own strength, Morel's last words were stifled in his throat. His chest heaved with sobs, and tears, which had for so long refused to come, poured from his eyes. He could no longer support himself, but fell on his knees, weeping, beside Valentine's bed. Now it was the turn of Davrigny. I, too, add my voice to that of Monsieur Morel to demand justice for this crime, he said emphatically. My heart rebels at the idea that my cowardly indulgence encouraged the murderer. Oh, my God, Villefort muttered, overwhelmed. Morel raised his head, and, looking at the old man, whose eyes were blazing with a superhuman light, he said, Monsieur Noirtier has something to say. Yes, Noirtier went, with an expression all the more dreadful in that all the poor man's faculties were concentrated in that look. Do you know the murderer? Morel asked. Yes, Noirtier replied. And you will direct us to him? The young man exclaimed. Listen, Monsieur d'Avrigny, listen! Noirtier gave the unhappy Morel a melancholy smile, one of those sweet smiles in his eyes that had so often made Valentine happy. Then he concentrated his attention. Having, so to speak, fastened the other man's eyes on his, he then turned them towards the door. Do you wish me to go out, monsieur? Morel asked, in a pitiful tone of voice. Yes, Noirtier said. Alas, monsieur, have pity on me! But the old man's eyes remained implacably fixed on the door. May I at least return? Asked Morel. Yes. Must I go out by myself? No. Whom should I take with me? The Crown Prosecutor? No. The doctor? Yes. You wish to remain alone with Monsieur de Villefort? Yes. Will he be able to understand you? Yes. Oh, yes, Villefort said, almost happy now that the investigation was to take place between the two of them. Have no fear, I can understand my father very well. But even though he said this with an expression of relief, the Crown Prosecutor's teeth were chattering violently. D'avrigny took Morel's arm and led the young man into the next room. Then the house lapsed into a silence deeper than the silence of death. Finally, after a quarter of an hour, an unsteady step could be heard, and Villefort appeared on the threshold of the drawing-room in which d'Avrigny and Morel were waiting, one absorbed in his thoughts, the other sunk in grief. "Come in," Villefort said, and he led them back to where Noirtier was sitting. Morel examined Villefort closely. The Crown Prosecutor's face was livid. Huge patches of reddish colour had appeared on his forehead, while, between his fingers, a quill was falling to pieces after being bent and twisted 100 different ways. "Gentlemen," he said to Morel and d'Avrigny in a strangled voice, "your word of honour that this dreadful secret will remain buried among us." The two men started. "I beg you," said Villefort. "But the guilty person," said Morel, "the murderer, the assassin." "Have no fear, monsieur. Justice shall be done," said Villefort. "My father has told me the name of the guilty person. He is as thirsty as you are for revenge. Yet, like me, he implores you to keep the secret. Don't you, father?" "Yes," Noirtier went firmly. Villefort continued. "He knows me, and I have given him my word. Rest assured, gentlemen. 3 days. I ask you for 3 days, which is less than the law would demand. And in 3 days, the revenge that I shall have exacted from the murderer of my child will make the most impassive of men shudder to the depths of his heart. Am I not right, father?" As he spoke, he ground his teeth and shook the old man's numbed hand. "Will all these promises be kept, Monsieur Noirtier?" Morel asked, while d'Avrigny put the same question with a look. "Yes," Noirtier answered, with a sinister joy in his eyes. "So, gentlemen, swear," Villefort said, joining d'Avrigny and Morel's hands. "Swear that you will take pity on the honour of my family and leave me to avenge it." D'Avrigny turned away and muttered a barely audible yes, but Morel tore his hand away from the judge, dashed over to the bed, pressed his lips to the icy lips of Valentine, and fled with the long drawn-out groan of a soul plunged in despair. We have already mentioned that all the servants had left. As a result, Monsieur de Villefort was obliged to ask d'Avrigny to take care of the proceedings, so delicate and so many, which must follow a death in one of our large towns, especially when it takes place in suspicious circumstances. As for Noirtier, his motionless grief, his frozen despair, and his noiseless tears was something terrible to behold. Villefort returned to his study. d'Avrigny went to fetch from the town hall the doctor who fulfills the office of coroner and is quite unambiguously designated Doctor of the Dead. Noirtier did not want to leave his granddaughter. After half an hour, d'Avrigny returned with his colleague. The street door had been closed, and, since the concierge had left with the rest of the staff, Villefort himself came to open it. But he stopped on the landing. He no longer had the courage to go into the death chamber, so the two doctors went in alone. Noirtier was close to the bed, as pale as the corpse, as motionless and as silent. The coroner approached the body with the indifference of a man who spends half his life in the presence of corpses, lifted the sheet covering the young woman, and partly opened her lips. "Don't worry. She's quite dead," said Davrani. "Poor girl." "Yes," the doctor replied laconically, letting the sheet fall back onto Valentine's face. Noirtier gave a dull croak. Davrani turned around. The old man's eyes were shining. The good doctor understood that Noirtier was asking to see his child. He brought him closer to the bed, and while the coroner was dipping the fingers that had touched the dead woman's lips into some chlorinated water, he uncovered the calm, pale face which looked like that of a sleeping angel. A tear once more appearing in Noirtier's eye expressed his gratitude to the doctor. The doctor of the dead wrote his report on the corner of a table in Valentine's room, and when this last formality was completed, Davrani showed him out. Villefort heard them descend and came to the door of his study. He briefly thanked the doctor and said, turning to Davrani, "And now the priest?" "Do you have a clergyman whom you would particularly like to have pray beside Valentine?" Davrani asked. "No," Villefort said. "Find the nearest one." "The nearest one," the doctor said, "is a good Italian abbé who has come to live in the house next to yours. Shall I go and see him on my way?" "Davrani," Villefort said, "please would you go with this gentleman? Here is a key so that you can come and go as you wish. Bring back the priest and take charge of settling him in my poor child's room." "Would you like to speak to him, my friend?" "I want to be alone. Please forgive me. A priest must understand every kind of sorrow, including a father's." And Monsieur de Villefort, giving Davrani a master key, once more took leave of the unknown doctor and returned to his study, where he began to work. For some constitutions, work is the cure for all ills. Just as the doctors were going out into the street, they noticed a man, dressed in a soutane, standing on the threshold of the house next door. "There is the person I mentioned," the coroner told Davrani. Davrani went over to the priest. "Monsieur," he said, "would you be willing to do a great service for an unfortunate father who has just lost his daughter, the Crown Prosecutor, Villefort?" "Yes, monsieur, I know," the priest answered in a pronounced Italian accent. "I know that death is in his house." "Then I do not need to tell you what he would like you to do for him." "I was going to volunteer my services, monsieur," the priest said. "It is our mission to exceed our duties." "It is a young woman." "I know. I learned that from the servants whom I saw fleeing the house. I learned, too, that she was called Valentine, and I have already prayed for her." "Thank you, monsieur, thank you," said Davrani. "And since you have already started to perform your holy office, please be good enough to continue. Come and sit with the dead woman, and the whole family will be grateful to you in its grief." "I am going, monsieur," the abbé replied, "and I may say that never will prayers have been more ardent than mine." Davrani took the abbé's hand, and, without meeting Villefort, who was shut up in his study, he led him up to Valentine's room, which the undertakers were to occupy only on the following night. When he entered the room, Noirtier's eyes met those of the abbé, and they must doubtless have read something particular in them, because they remained fixed on the priest. Davrani entrusted him not only with the dead woman, but also with the living man, and the priest promised Davrani that he would give his prayers to Valentine and his care to Noirtier. He made this solemn promise, and doubtless to avoid being interrupted in his devotions, and so that Noirtier would not be disturbed in his grief, as soon as Monsieur Davrani had left the room, he went to draw not only the bolts on the door through which the doctor had just left, but also those on the door leading to the apartments of Madame de Villefort. And I think there we shall take a break. Very convenient that he dresses up as an abbé, isn't it? And moves in next door. Good planning. But yes, thank you all for being here. Go do break-related things, and we shall see you back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. back. Hello. Apologies if I took a little bit longer. I was making myself a cup of tea and putting some leftovers in the fridge. Very interesting things, I'm sure. But yes, I hope you have all had a good break. I hope you've done break-related things. I hope you have some kind of, I don't know, warm beverage or something. Because it is getting to the cold times of the year, almost. It's an important task. Yeah, it is a very important task. I'm glad you agree. But yes, hope everybody is doing well and enjoying it so far. I've noticed that I have dropped some frames, so apologies if there is some buffering. I think everybody's internet's been a bit ropey lately, I think. Or at least certain internet providers seem to have been a bit iffy of late. I'm not entirely sure why. But yeah, mine's been a bit off and on, so I see I'm currently dropping quite a lot of frames, so apologies for that. Hopefully it'll sort itself out soon. But yeah, how many chapters have we got left to do for today? I think we've got 2, possibly? Yeah. I think 2 more chapters should do us. Might even get to 3. We shall see. How many pages is the third one? Wait, is that just... Oops, I just punched the microphone. Apologies. No. Getting some buffering. Yeah, sorry about that. Well, it's back in the green, so hopefully, fingers crossed, touch wood, all of that. Hopefully it'll chill. That is the hope. But yes, let us continue with the Count of Monte Cristo. And chapter 104, The Signature of Baron Danglars. The following day dawned sad and overcast. During the night the undertakers had accomplished their dismal task and sewn the body, as it lay on the bed, in that shroud which gloomily enfolds the dead, supplying, whatever is said about the levelling effect of death, a last sign of the luxury that they enjoyed in their lifetimes. In this case, the shroud was a magnificent piece of cambric lawn that the young woman had bought a mere fortnight earlier. During the evening, some men who had been brought in for this purpose transported Noirtier from Valentine's room to his own, and, against all expectation, the old man made no objection to being taken away from his grandchild's body. Abbé Busoni watched until daybreak, and then went back to his house without calling anyone. At about 8 in the morning, Davrigny returned. He had met Villefort, who was going to see Noirtier, and accompanied him in order to discover how the old man had spent the night. They found him in the large armchair that served as his bed, enjoying a gentle sleep and almost smiling. They both stopped on the threshold in astonishment. "You see," Daphne said to Villefort, who was looking at his sleeping father, "see how nature is able to assuage the most awful pain. Surely no one would have said that Monsieur Noirtier did not love his granddaughter, yet he is asleep." "Yes, you are right," Villefort replied in surprise. "He is sleeping, and that is very strange, because the slightest upset used to keep him awake for nights on end." "He is exhausted by grief," Daphne replied, and the 2 men returned thoughtfully to the Crown Prosecutor's study. "Now, I didn't sleep," Villefort said, showing Davrigny his untouched bed. "Grief has not exhausted me, and I have not been to bed for 2 nights. On the other hand, look at my desk. Good Lord, what I have written over those 2 days and nights! How I have perused that dossier, how I have annotated that indictment against the murderer Benedetto. Work, work, my passion, my joy, my fury. It is for you to exhaust all my griefs." And he seized Davrigny's hand in a convulsive grip. "Do you need me?" the doctor asked. "No," Villefort said, "but I beg you, come back at 11 o'clock. It is at 12 that... Oh, my poor child! The departure... My God, my poor child!" And the Crown Prosecutor, a man again, raised his eyes to heaven and heaved a great sigh. "Will you be receiving in the drawing-room, then?" "No, I have a cousin who has agreed to undertake that sad honour. I shall work, Doctor. When I work, everything vanishes." And indeed, the doctor had hardly reached the door before the Crown Prosecutor was once more immersed in his labours. On the steps, d'Avrigny met the relative whom Villefort had mentioned, an insignificant personage both in the family and in this story, one of those beings who are born to play a purely utilitarian role in the world. He was punctual, dressed in black, with a crape armband, and he had come round to his cousin's with his face composed into a suitable expression, which he intended to keep for as long as need be, and then put aside. At 11 o'clock the funerary carriages were clattering over the paved courtyard, and the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré filled with the murmur of the crowd, equally hungry for the joys and the griefs of the rich, and hurrying to a fine funeral with the same haste as it would to a duchess's wedding. Little by little the drawing-room filled up with mourners. Among the first to arrive were some of our old acquaintances, Debray, Châteaurenard, and Beauchamp, then all the luminaries of the bench, of letters and the arts, because Monsieur de Villefort, less by reason of his social standing than for his personal qualities, occupied one of the highest ranks in Parisian society. The cousin stood at the door and showed everyone in, and it must be said that it was a great relief for the indifferent to see a neutral face who did not require the guests to produce any hypocritical expression or false tears, as a father, brother, or fiancé would have done. Those who knew one another exchanged looks and gathered in groups, one of which was made up of Debray, Châteaurenard, and Beauchamp. "Poor girl," Debray said, acknowledging this sad occasion, as, incidentally, everyone else was quite spontaneously doing. "Poor girl. So rich and beautiful. Would you have thought it, Châteaurenard, when we came here, when was it, 3 weeks or a month ago at the most, to sign that contract that was not signed?" "Heavens, no," said Châteaurenard. "Did you know her?" "I spoke to her once or twice at Madame de Morcerf's ball. She seemed charming, if a trifle melancholic. Where is the stepmother? Do you know?" "She has gone to spend the day with the wife of the worthy gentleman who greeted us as we came in." "And what might he be?" "Who?" "The gentleman at the door, a member of Parliament." "No," said Beauchamp. "I am condemned to see those honourable gentlemen daily, and I don't know his face." "Did you mention this death in your newspaper?" "I didn't write the piece myself, but it was mentioned. I doubt if it will please Monsieur de Villefort. I believe the writer remarked that if 4 successive deaths had occurred anywhere except in the Crown Prosecutor's house, the Crown Prosecutor would have certainly had more to say about it." "For all that," Châteaurenard said, "Dr. d'Avrigny is my mother's doctor, and says he is quite distraught." "Who do you keep looking for, Debray?" "The Count of Monte Cristo," the young man replied. "I met him on the boulevard on my way here. I think he was just leaving, going to his banker," Beauchamp said. "His banker? Isn't that Danglars?" Châteaurenard asked Debray. "I think so," the private secretary answered, with some faint signs of unease. "But Monte Cristo is not the only person I can't see here. Where is Morel?" "Morel? Did he know them?" asked Châteaurenard. "I think he had been introduced to Madame de Villefort only." "No matter, he should have come," said Debray. "What will he have to talk about this evening? This burial is the main news of the day. But hush, say no more. Here is the Minister of Justice and Religion. He will feel obliged to make his little speech to the mournful cousin." And the 3 young people went over to the door to hear the minister's speech. What Beauchamp had said was true. On his way to the funeral he had met Monte Cristo, who was going to see Danglars at his home in the Rue de la Chaussée-d'Antin. From his window the banker had seen the Count's carriage turning into the courtyard. He came to meet him with a sad but welcoming face. "Well, Count," he said, offering Monte Cristo his hand, "you have come to offer me your condolences. In truth, my family is plagued by misfortune, to the point where, when I saw you coming, I was just asking myself whether I might have harboured some uncharitable thoughts against those poor Morcerfs, to justify the proverb, let ill befall him that wishes ill. Well, no, on my honour, I did not wish any ill on Morcerf. He may perhaps be a little proud for a man who has come up from nothing, like me, and owes everything to himself, like me, but we all have our faults. Ah, mark this, Count, men of our generation— but forgive me, you aren't of our generation, you're a young man. Those of our generation are not having a good year this year. Take our puritanical crown prosecutor, take Villefort, who has just lost his daughter. Why, in sum, there is Villefort, as I said, losing all his family in mysterious circumstances, Morcerf dishonoured and dead, myself dishonoured by the villainy of that Benedetto, and then—" "Then what?" the Count asked. "Oh, alas, don't you know?" "Some new misfortune?" "My daughter." "Mademoiselle Danglars?" "Eugénie has left us." "Good heavens, what are you saying?" "The truth, my dear Count. You don't know how lucky you are, not having a wife or children." "Do you think so?" "Oh, my God!" "You said that Mademoiselle Eugénie was unable to bear the indignity to which that wretch subjected us, and asked my permission to travel." "Has she left already?" "A few nights ago." "With Madame Danglars?" "No, with a relative. But we are still losing her, dearest Eugénie, because, knowing her proud character, I doubt if she will ever consent to return to France." "What can be done, my dear Baron?" said Monte Cristo. "These are family sorrows which would be devastating for some poor devil whose child was his whole fortune, but are bearable for a millionaire. Whatever philosophers say, a practical man will always contradict them on this. Money is a great consolation, and you should be more easily consoled than anyone, if you will admit the virtues of this sovereign remedy. You, the king of finance, at the crossroads of power." Danglars looked sideways at the Count to see if he was mocking him or speaking seriously. "Yes," he said, "the fact is that if wealth is a consolation, I should feel it because I am rich." "So rich, my dear Baron, that your fortune is like the pyramids. Even if anyone should wish to demolish them, he would not dare, and if he dared, he could not." Danglars smiled at this confident bonhomie. "That reminds me," he said, "when you came in I was making out 5 little bills. I had already signed 2 of them. Would you permit me to do the other 3? "Of course, my dear Baron, of course." There was a moment's silence, broken only by the scratching of the banker's quill, while Monte Cristo stared at the gilt mouldings on the ceiling. "Spanish bonds?" Monte Cristo asked. "Haitian bonds? Bonds from Naples?" "No," Danglars said, giving one of his self-satisfied laughs. "Bearer bonds drawn on the Bank of France. Here, Count," he added, "you who are the Emperor of Finance as I am the King, have you seen many scraps of paper this size, each worth $1 million?" Monte Cristo took the 5 paper bills that Danglars proudly tendered him, as if to weigh them in his hand, and read, "May it please the governor of the bank to pay on my order, from the funds deposited by me, the sum of 1 million, value in account, Baron Danglars." 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Monte Cristo counted. 5 million! Damnation, there's no stopping you, milord Croesus. "That's how I do business," said Danglars. "Marvellous! especially since, as I have no doubt, the sum is to be paid in cash." "It will be," said Danglars. "It is wonderful to have such credit. In truth, one only finds such things here in France. 5 scraps of paper worth 5 million. It has to be seen to be believed." "Do you doubt it?" "No." "You say that in a certain kind of voice. Go on, try it. Drive my clerk to the bank and you will see him come out with treasury bonds for the same amount." "No," Monte Cristo said, folding the bills. "No, it's too amazing. I'll test it for myself. My credit with you was 6 million. I have drawn 900,000 francs, so you still owe me 5,100,000 francs. I'll take your 5 scraps of paper, which I will accept on the sole guarantee of your signature, and give you here a receipt for the whole of the 6 million, which will settle our account. I prepared it in advance because, I have to tell you, I am in great need of my money today." And with one hand Monte Cristo put the 5 bills in his pocket, while with the other he handed his receipt to the banker. If a thunderbolt had fallen at Danglars' feet, he could not have been stricken with such terror.
What?" he stammered. What, Count? Are you taking that money? Excuse me, please, that's money I owe to the hospice, a deposit, and I promised to pay it this morning."
"Oh, that's another matter," said Monte Cristo. "I'm not particular about these 5 bills exactly. Pay me with some other bonds. It was out of sheer curiosity that I took these, so that I could tell everyone that, with no prior warning, without asking me to wait even for 5 minutes, the firm of Danglars paid me 5 million in cash. It would have been quite exceptional. But here are your bonds. As I say, give me some others." He handed the 5 bills to Danglars, who, white as a sheet, at first put out his hand, like a vulture reaching out his claw beyond the bars of his cage to pull back the meat that someone was trying to wrench from him. Then, suddenly, he changed his mind, making a violent effort to contain his feelings. "In point of fact," he said, "your receipt is currency." "Of course it is. If you were in Rome, the house of Thompson and French would not make any more difficulty about paying you against my receipt than you have done yourself." "Forgive me, Monsieur le Comte, forgive me." "So I can keep this money?"
"Yes,"
said Danglars, wiping away the sweat that had gathered along his hairline.
Keep it.
Monte Cristo put the 5 notes into his pocket with that untranslatable expression on his face that says, "Come now, think again. There is still time if you want to change your mind."
No, said Danglars. "No, really, keep my bills. You know there is no one so much a stickler for formality as a money man. I meant to give that money to the hospice, and I would have thought myself a robber if I didn't give them those very bills, as if one écu were not worth the same as any other. Forgive me." And he burst into a loud, nervous laugh. "I forgive you," Monte Cristo replied graciously. "There." And he put the bills into his portfolio. "But that leaves 100,000 francs,
said Danglars. "Oh, a mere trifle," said Monte Cristo. "The charges must amount more or less to that amount. Keep it, and we'll be quits."
"Count, are you serious?"
said Danglars. "I never joke with bankers," Monte Cristo said, with a gravity bordering on impertinence. He was just going towards the door when the valet announced, "Monsieur de Beauville, Receiver General for Hospices." "Well, well," said Monte Cristo, "it seems I came just in time to benefit from your bills. Everyone's after them." Danglars went pale again and hurried to take his leave of the Count. Monte Cristo exchanged courteous greetings with Monsieur de Beauville, who was standing in the waiting room. As soon as Monte Cristo had gone, he was shown into Monsieur Danglars' study. One might have seen the Count's grave features light up with a fleeting smile at the sight of the portfolio that the Receiver General was carrying in his hand. At the door, he got into his carriage and asked to be driven immediately to the Bank of France. Meanwhile, repressing his feelings, Danglars came forward to greet the receiver. It goes without saying that the smile on his lips and the courteous manner were purely for show. "Good morning, dear creditor," he said, "for I am prepared to wager that it is the creditor who has come to see me." "Quite so, Baron," Monsieur de Beauville said. "You see before you, in my person, the hospices whose widows and orphans hold out their hands in mine to ask for alms of 5 million francs. "And they say orphans are to be pitied," Danglars said, carrying on the pleasantry. "Poor mites! So I have come in their name. Did you get my letter of yesterday's date?" "I did." "Here is my receipt, then." "My dear Monsieur de Beauville," Danglars said, "perhaps your widows and orphans would be good enough to wait for 24 hours, since Monsieur de Monte Cristo, whom you have just seen leaving here, you did see him, I suppose?" "Yes, I did. What about it?" "Well, Monsieur de Monte Cristo was taking away the 5 million. "How do you mean?" The Count has an unlimited credit with me, a credit opened by the house of Thomson and French in Rome. He came to ask me for the sum of 5 million in a single payment. I gave him a draft on the bank. That is where my funds are deposited, and you understand, I am afraid it might seem rather strange to the governor if I were to draw 10 million on him in one day. In 2 days, Danglars added, that's a different matter." Come, Monsieur de Beauville exclaimed in tones of utter incredulity. 5 million to that gentleman who was just leaving and who greeted me as he went, as though I knew him." "Perhaps he does know you, without you knowing him. The Count of Monte Cristo knows everybody." 5 million. "Here is his receipt. Be like St. Thomas, see and touch." Monsieur de Beauville took the paper that Danglars gave him and read, "Received of Baron Danglars the sum of 5,100,000 francs, to be reimbursed to him on demand by the house of Thomson and French in Rome." "Good Lord, it's true." "Do you know the firm of Thomson and French?" Danglars asked. "Yes," said Monsieur de Beauville. "I did once do business with them for 200,000 francs, but I have not heard anything of them since then. "It is one of the finest houses in Europe," Danglars said, lightly tossing down the receipt that he had just taken from Monsieur de Beauville's hands. "And so he had 5 million just with you? Well, I never. Is he a nabob, this Count of Monte Cristo?" "To be honest, I don't know what he is. But he had 3 unlimited credits, one with me, one with Rothschild, and one with Lafitte. And," Danglars added casually, "as you see, he gave me precedence, leaving 100,000 francs for bank charges." Monsieur de Beauville gave every sign of extreme admiration. "I must go and call on him," he said, "and get some pious bequest for us." "You can count on it. His donations to charity alone amount to more than 20,000 francs a month." "Splendid! And I would offer him the example of Madame de Morcerf and her son." "What example?" "They gave all their money to almshouses." "What money?" "Their wealth, General de Morcerf's, the deceased." "Why?" "Because they did not want a fortune that had been so dishonourably acquired." "What will they live on?" "The mother is to retire to Provence, and the son is going to enlist." "Well, well," said Danglars, "what fine scruples." "I registered the donation yesterday." "How much do they have?" "Oh, not much, 12 or 1,300,000 francs. But let's get back to our millions." "Certainly," Danglars said, as naturally as could be imagined. "So are you in a hurry for this money?" "Yes, I am. The accountants check our assets tomorrow." "Tomorrow?
Why didn't you say so at once? But it's ages until tomorrow. What time does the cheque take place?
At 2:00.
Send someone round at midday, Danglars said with a smile.
Monsieur de Beauville did not answer anything much. He nodded and shuffled his portfolio.
But I've just thought of a better idea, said Danglars.
What should I do?
Monsieur de Monte Cristo's receipt is worth money. Take it to Rothschild or Lafitte. They will take it from you immediately.
Even though it's reimbursable in Rome?
Of course. It will just cost you a discount of 5,000 or 6,000 francs.
The receiver started back. No, indeed. I'd rather wait till tomorrow.
Whatever next? I beg your pardon, Danglars said with supreme insolence. I thought for a moment that you had a little deficit to make up.
Huh, said the receiver.
Listen, this kind of thing happens, and in such cases one must make a small sacrifice.
No, thank you, said Monsieur de Beauville.
Then, until tomorrow, my dear friend?
Yes, until tomorrow. Without fail, I hope?
Of course, you're joking. Send someone at midday and the bank will have it ready.
I'll come myself.
Even better, since that will give me the pleasure of seeing you again.
They shook hands.
By the by, said Monsieur de Beauville, aren't you going to the funeral of that poor Mademoiselle de Villefort, which I passed on my way here? No, the Baron said. I am still made to feel a little ridiculous since the matter of that Benedetto, so I'm keeping my head down. Come now, you're quite wrong. Was any of that your fault? Well, my dear friend, you know, when one has a name as spotless as mine, one is vulnerable. Believe me, everyone feels sorry for you, and most of all for your poor daughter. Yes, poor Eugenie, Danglars said with a deep sigh. Did you know she was taking the veil, monsieur?
No.
Alas, yes, it's only too true. The very next day after all that, she decided to set off with one of her friends, who is a nun. She's gone to look for a convent of some very strict order in Italy or Spain.
But that's dreadful. And Monsieur de Beauville bowed himself out with a flood of condolences to the father. No sooner was he outside, however, than Danglars, with an emphatic energy that will be understood only by those who have seen a performance of Robert Masser by Frédéric, exclaimed, "Imbecile!" And, slipping Monte Cristo's receipt into a little portfolio, he added, "Come at midday. I'll be a long way off." Then he double-locked his door, emptied all the drawers of his cash desk, amassed some 50,000 francs in banknotes, burned various papers, put others where they could clearly be seen, and began to write a letter, which he eventually sealed, marking it on the outside, "To Madame the Baroness Danglars."
"This evening," he muttered, "I shall leave it myself on her dressing-table."
Then he took a passport out of the drawer.
"Good," he said. "It is still valid for another 2 months."
Chapter 105. The Père Lachaise Cemetery. Monsieur Beauville had indeed crossed the route of the funeral procession leading Valentine to her final resting place. The weather was dark and cloudy. A wind, still warm but fatal to the yellowed leaves, was whipping them off the branches, which were gradually stripped clean, and making them flutter above the heads of the vast crowd filling the boulevards. Monsieur de Villefort, a pure Parisian, considered the Père Lachaise cemetery the only one worthy of receiving the mortal remains of a Parisian family. The others appeared to him like country cemeteries, death's lodging-houses. Only in the Père Lachaise could the respectable departed be accommodated at home. There, as we have seen, he had bought a perpetual lease on the plot above which rose the monument which was being so swiftly occupied by all the members of his family.
The pediment of the mausoleum bore the inscription, "Families of Saint-Marin and Villefort," such having been the last wish of poor Renée, Valentine's mother. So it was towards the Père Lachaise that the magnificent cortège wended its way from the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. They crossed all Paris, following the Faubourg du Temple and then the outer boulevards as far as the cemetery. More than 50 private carriages followed behind 20 funerary coaches, and behind these more than 500 more people were following on foot. Almost all were young men who had been forcibly struck by Valentine's death, and who, despite the cold mists of the century and the prosaic spirit of the age, felt the elegiac poetry of this beautiful, chaste, adorable young woman struck down in her prime. As they were leaving Paris, they saw a speedy team of 4 horses drawing a coach which suddenly halted as they stiffened their hocks, which were as nervous as steel springs. It was Monte Cristo. The Count got down from his barouche and joined the crowd following the hearse on foot. Chateau Renard noticed him. He at once got out of his coupé and came over to his side. Beauchamp also left the hired cab in which he had been riding. The Count was searching carefully through every gap in the crowd. Obviously he was looking for someone. Eventually he could contain himself no longer. "Where is Morel?" he asked. "Does any one of you gentlemen know where he is?" "We were already wondering that at the house," said Chateau Renard. "No one has seen him." The Count said nothing, but continued to search around him. Finally, they reached the cemetery. Suddenly Monte Cristo's sharp eyes penetrated the clumps of yews and pine trees, and soon he lost all anxiety. A shape had glided under the dark walkways, and Monte Cristo had doubtless seen what he was looking for. Everyone knows what a burial is like in this magnificent necropolis. Dark groups scattered around the white walkways, the silence of sky and earth broken by the sound of some snapping branches or a hedge trampled around a tomb. Then the melancholy chanting of the priests, mingled here and there with a sob rising from beneath a cluster of flowers, behind which one can see a woman, overcome, her hands clasped. The shadow that Monte Cristo had noticed was quickly moving through the quincunx of trees behind the tomb of Héloïse and Abélard, as he stood with the undertakers at the head of the horses drawing the hearse, and a moment later was at the place chosen for the sepulchre. Each one was looking at something, but Monte Cristo looked only at the shadow which had hardly been noticed by those around it. Twice he came out of the crowd to see if the man's hands were feeling for something hidden under his clothes. When the cortège halted, the shadow could be recognized as Morel, with his black coat buttoned up right to the neck, his ashen forehead, his hollow cheeks, and his hat crumpled in his hands. He was standing with his back to a tree, on a mound above the mausoleum, so that he would lose none of the details of the funeral ceremony that was about to take place. Everything went off according to custom. A few men, and always the least impressive, made speeches. Some regretted this premature death, others expatiated on her father's death. Some had been found who were ingenious enough to have discovered that the young woman had more than once implored Monsieur de Villefort on behalf of guilty men over whose head the sword of justice was suspended. Finally, every flowery metaphor and tortuous syntactical device was exhausted in every type of commentary on the lines written by Malberto du Perrier. Monte Cristo heard and saw nothing. Or rather, he saw nothing except Morel, whose calm immobility was a terrifying sight for the only person able to read what was going on in the depths of the young officer's heart. "Look," Beauchamp suddenly said to Debray, "there's Morel. Why the devil has he planted himself over there?" And they pointed him out to Chateau Renard. "How pale he is," Chateau Renard said with a shudder. "He's cold," said Debray. "Not so," Chateau Renard said slowly. "I think it's the emotion. Maximilian's a very impressionable man." "Pah!" Debray retorted. "He hardly knew Mademoiselle de Villefort. You said so yourself." "That's true, but I remember that at Madame de Morcerf's ball he did dance with her 3 times. You know, that ball where you made such an effect." No, I don't know," Monte Cristo answered, without knowing either to whom or about what he was speaking. So much was he preoccupied with watching Morel, whose cheeks were moving like those of someone who is gasping or holding his breath. "The speeches are over. Farewell, gentlemen," the Count said brusquely, and he gave a signal for departure by vanishing, though no one knew where. The funerary spectacle being over, the audience turned back towards Paris. Only Chateau Renard for a moment looked around for Morel, but while his eyes were following the disappearing figure of the Count, Morel had left his place, and Chateau Renard, after looking for him in vain, followed Debray and Beauchamp. Monte Cristo had slipped into a thicket, and hidden behind a wide tomb was watching Morel's every movement. The young man had gradually gone over towards the mausoleum, from which the onlookers and then the workmen were drifting away. He looked around him slowly and vaguely, but just as his head was turning towards the point on the horizon opposite him, Monte Cristo took advantage of this to come forward another 10 yards without being seen. Morel was kneeling. The Count, arching his neck, his eyes staring and the pupils dilated, his knees flexed as if to jump at the merest signal, came closer and closer. Morel bent his forehead until it touched the stone, grasped the iron railings with both hands, and murmured, "Oh, Valentine!" The Count's heart was rent by the shattering effect of those 2 words. He took another step, and said, touching Morel on the shoulder, "Oh, it's you, dear friend. I was looking for you." He expected some outburst, reproaches or recriminations, but he was wrong. Morel turned around, and with an appearance of calm said, "You see, I was praying." The Count scrutinized the young man from head to toe, and seemed more at ease after this examination. "Would you like me to take you back to Paris?" he asked. "No, thank you." "Do you need anything?" "Please leave me to pray." The Count went away without any objection, but only to take up a new station from which he could see everything that Morel did. The latter finally got up, wiped his knees where they had been whitened by the stones, and set off towards Paris without looking around. He was walking slowly down the Rue de la Roquette. The Count, sending on his carriage, which had been waiting at the cemetery, followed 100 yards behind him. Maximilien crossed the canal and returned to the Rue de Meslay by the boulevards. 5 minutes after the door had shut behind him, it reopened to admit Monte Cristo. Julie was at the entrance to the garden, where she was entirely absorbed in watching Maître Penelon with the utmost seriousness concerning his profession as a gardener. He was taking cuttings from some Bengal roses. "Ah, Monsieur le Comte de Monte Cristo!" she exclaimed with the joy that every member of the family usually displayed when the Count visited the Rue Meslay. "Maximilian has just come home, I believe, madame?" the Count said. "I think I saw him go past, yes," the young woman said. "But please call Emmanuel." "No, madame, you must excuse me. I have to go up immediately to Maximilien's," Monte Cristo replied. "I have something of the utmost importance to tell him." "Then go," she said, following him with her delightful smile until he had vanished up the stairs. Monte Cristo soon went up the 2 floors between the ground and Maximilien's room.
On the landing he stopped to listen. Not a sound could be heard. As in most old houses inhabited by a single master, the landing was closed off only by a glazed door. However, there was no key on the outside. Maximilian had shut himself inside, but it was impossible to see through the glass because there was a red silk curtain across the door. The Count's anxiety showed itself in a reddening of the face, a quite unusual sign of emotion in this impassive man. "What should I do?" he muttered, and thought for a moment. "Should I ring? No. The sound of a bell, that is to say of a visitor, often precipitates the resolve of those in Maximilian's situation, and then another sound follows that of the bell." He shuddered from head to toe. Then, since he was a man whose decisions are made with the swiftness of lightning, he struck one of the panes of glass in the door with his elbow. It shattered, and he lifted the curtain to see Morel in front of his desk, a quill in his hand, having just leapt up at the sound of the breaking glass. "Nothing," the Count said. "1,000 apologies, my dear friend. I slipped and my elbow went through your glass door. But now, since it is broken, I shall take advantage of that to come in. Please don't disturb yourself, I beg you." And putting his hand through the broken pane, he opened the door. Morel got up, evidently irritated, and came across to Monte Cristo, less to greet him than to bar his way. "I do declare it's your servant's fault," Monte Cristo said, rubbing his elbow. "The floors here shine like mirrors." "Have you hurt yourself, monsieur?" Morel asked coldly. "I don't know. What were you doing there? Writing?" "What was I doing? Your fingers are all ink-stained." "That's true," Morel replied. "I was writing. It does happen sometimes, even though I'm a soldier." Monte Cristo took a few steps into the apartment. Maximilian was obliged to let him pass, but he followed behind. "You were writing, then?" Monte Cristo said, with a daunting stare. "I've already had the honour to answer yes," said Morel. The Count took another look around him. "And your pistols are beside the writing table," he said, pointing to the weapons on Morel's desk. "I am leaving on a journey," Maximilian answered. "My dear fellow," Monte Cristo said with infinite tenderness. "Monsieur?" "My friend, my dear Maximilian, I beg you, do nothing irrevocable." "Irrevocable?" Morel said, shrugging his shoulders. "How can a voyage be irrevocable, I wonder?" "Irrevocable, I wonder." "Maximilian," Monte Cristo said, "let's both drop the masks we are wearing. You no more deceive me with that appearance of calm than I do you with my light-hearted concern. You realise, don't you, that to do what I have just done, to have broken your door and violated the privacy of a friend's room, you realise, I say, that to do such a thing I must be harbouring some serious anxiety, or rather a dreadful certainty. Morel, you want to kill yourself." "Well now," Morel said, shaking, "where did you get that idea, Monsieur le Comte?" "I say that you want to kill yourself," the Count went on in the same tone of voice, "and here is the proof." Going over to the desk, he picked up the white sheet of paper that the young man had thrown over the letter he had been writing, and took the letter. Morel rushed forward to snatch it from his hands. However, Monte Cristo had anticipated the gesture and grasped Maximilian by the wrist, halting him like a steel chain halts an unfolding spring. "You see," said the Count, "you do want to kill yourself. Here it is in black and white." "Very well," Morel exclaimed, instantaneously switching from an appearance of calm to one of extreme violence. "Very well, suppose that is so. Suppose I have decided to turn the barrel of this pistol against myself. Who will stop me? Who will have the courage to stop me?
Suppose I should say, all my hopes are dashed, my heart is broken, my life is extinguished, there is nothing about me except mourning and horror, the earth has turned to ashes and every human voice is tearing me apart. Suppose I should say, it is only humane to let me die, because if you do not, I shall lose my reason, I shall become mad. Tell me, monsieur, if I should say that, and when it is seen that it is voiced with the anguish and the tears of my heart, will anyone answer me, you are wrong? Will anyone prevent me from being the most unhappy of creatures? Tell me, Count, would you have the courage to do so?
Yes, Morel, Monte Cristo said, in a voice so calm that it contrasted strangely with the young man's excited tones. Yes, I am the one.
You!
Morel cried, with a growing expression of anger and reproach.
You, who deceived me with absurd hopes. You who restrained me, lulled me, deadened me with vain promises, when, by some dramatic stroke or extreme resolve, I might have been able to save her, or at least to see her die in my arms. You who pretend to have all the resources of intelligence and the powers of matter. You who play, or appear to play, the role of Providence, and don't even have the power to give an antidote to a young girl who has been poisoned. Oh, monsieur, I swear it, you would inspire pity in me if you did not inspire horror.
Morel!
Yes, you told me to lay down the mask. Well, you may have your wish. I shall lay it down. Yes, when you followed me to the cemetery, I still answered you out of the goodness of my heart. When you came in here, I allowed you to do so. But now that you are taking advantage of my goodness and challenging me even here in this room, to which I had retired as if to my tomb, since you are inflicting a new torment on me when I thought I had exhausted every form of torment. Count of Monte Cristo, my supposed benefactor, Count of Monte Cristo, universal saviour, then be satisfied. You will witness the death of your friend. And, with a mad laugh on his lips, Morel threw himself once more towards the pistols. Monte Cristo, pale as a ghost but with his eyes flashing, reached out for the weapons and said to the frenzied man, "I repeat that you will not kill yourself." "Just try to stop me," Morel said, making a final grasp which, just like the previous one, exhausted itself against the Count's steely arm. "I will prevent you." "But who are you, then, after all, to dare claim this tyranny over free, intelligent creatures?" "Who am I?" Monte Cristo repeated. "Let me tell you." And he continued, "I am the only man in the world who has the right to say to you, 'Morel, I do not want your father's son to die this day.'" Monte Cristo, majestic, transfigured, sublime, advanced with arms folded towards the trembling young man, who, overcome despite himself by the near divinity of the man, shrank back a step. "Why do you mention my father?" he stammered. "Why involve the memory of my father in what is happening to me now?" "Because I am the man who has already saved your father's life, one day when he wanted to kill himself as you do today. Because I am the man who sent the purse to your young sister and the Pharaon to old Morel. Because I am Edmond Dantès, who dandled you on his knees when you were a child." Morel shrank back again, staggering, panting, speechless, overwhelmed. Then all his sense failed him, and he fell prostrate at Monte Cristo's feet. But then, at once, just as suddenly and completely, there was a surge of regeneration in that admirable constitution. He got up, leapt out of the room, and dashed to the top of the stairs, crying at the top of his voice, "Julie! Julie! Emmanuel! Emmanuel!" Monte Cristo also tried to follow, but Maximilian would have died rather than release the hinges of the door, which he thrust back against the Count. At the sound of Maximilian's cries, Julie, Emmanuel, Penelon, and some servants ran up in fright. Morel took them by the hands, and, reopening the door, gasped out in a voice stifled by sobs, "On your knees! On your knees! This is the benefactor! This is our father's saviour. This is—"
He was about to say, "This is Edmond Dantès." The Count stopped him by grasping his arm. Julie seized the Count's hand. Emmanuel embraced him as he would a guardian angel, and Morel again fell to his knees, dashing his forehead against the ground. At this, the man of bronze felt his heart swell in his breast. A devouring flame shot from his throat to his eyes, and he lowered his head and wept. For a few moments the room was full of a chorus of tears and sublime sobs that must have seemed harmonious even to the dearest angels of the Lord. Scarcely had Julie recovered from the deep emotion that had overwhelmed her than she rushed out of the room, went down one floor, and ran into the drawing-room with childish glee to lift the glass dome protecting the purse given by the stranger in the Allée de Mélun. Meanwhile, Emmanuel said to the Count, in a voice choking with emotion, "Oh, Count, how, when you heard us so often speak of our unknown benefactor, when you saw us surround his memory with such gratitude and adoration, how could you wait until today to reveal yourself? Oh, this is cruel towards us, and I might almost say towards yourself." "Listen, my friend," the Count said, "and I can call you that because, without realizing it, you have been my friend for 11 years. The revelation of this secret has come about by a great event that you cannot know. God is my witness that I wished to conceal it forever in my soul, but your brother Maximilien forced it out of me by violence, which I am sure he now regrets." Then, seeing that Maximilien had thrown himself sideways onto a chair while still remaining on his knees, he said softly, squeezing Emmanuel's hand in a significant manner, "Take care of him." "Why?" the young man asked in astonishment. "I cannot tell you, but watch over him." Emmanuel looked around the room and saw Morel's pistols. His eyes settled in alarm on the weapons, which he pointed out to Monte Cristo by slowly raising his arm towards them. Monte Cristo nodded, and Emmanuel made a movement in the direction of the pistols. "Leave them," said the Count. Then, going to Morel, he took his hand. The tumult that had briefly racked his heart had given way to a profound stupor. Julie came back upstairs, holding the silk purse in her hands, and 2 shining and happy tears ran down her cheeks like 2 drops of morning dew. "Here is the relic," she said. "Do not think that it is any less dear to me since our Saviour was revealed." "My child," Monte Cristo said, blushing, "allow me to take back that purse. Now that you know the features of my face, I should not want to be recalled to your memory except by the affection that I beg you to give me." "Oh, no," Julie said, pressing the purse to her heart. "No, I beg you, because one day you might leave us. Because one day, alas, you will leave us, won't you?" "You are right, madame," Monte Cristo replied, smiling. "In a week I shall have left this country where so many people who deserved the vengeance of heaven were living happily while my father was dying of hunger and grief." As he was announcing his forthcoming departure, Monte Cristo kept his eyes on Morel and noticed that the words, "I shall have left this country," passed without rousing the young man from his lethargy. He realized that he must engage in a further bout against his friend's grief, and taking the hands of Julie and Emmanuel and clasping them in his own, he told them with the gentle authority of a father, "My dear friends, please leave me alone with Maximilien." For Julie this was an excuse to take away the precious relic which Monte Cristo had forgotten to mention again. She pulled her husband after her, saying, "Come, let's leave them." The Count remained alone with Morel, who was as motionless as a statue. "Come now," the Count said, touching his shoulder with his fiery hand. "Are you once more becoming a man, Maximilien?" "Yes, because I am starting to suffer again." The Count frowned, seemingly a prey to some grave dilemma. "Maximilien, Maximilien," he said, "the thoughts that obsess you are unworthy of a Christian." "Have no fear, my friend," Morel said, looking up with a smile of infinite sadness. "I shall no longer seek for death." "So, no more weapons, no more despair?" "No, for I have something better than the barrel of a gun or the point of a knife to cure me of my grief." "You poor crazed man, what do you have?" "I have my grief itself. That will kill me." "My friend," Monte Cristo said, in tones as melancholy as those of the man he was addressing, "listen to me. One day, in a moment of despair equal to your own, since it induced me to take a similar resolution, I too wanted to kill myself. And one day, your father, equally desperate, also wanted to do the same. If anyone had said to your father, at the moment when he was lifting the barrel of the pistol to his head, and if anyone had said to me at the moment when I was thrusting away from my bed the prison bread that I had not touched for 3 days, I say, if anyone had said to us at that climactic moment, 'Live, because the day will come when you will be happy and bless life,' then, wherever that voice had come from, we would have answered it with a smile of scepticism or with pained incredulity. And yet, how many times, when he embraced you, has your father not blessed life, and how many times have I—" "Ah!" Morel cried, interrupting him. "But you only lost your freedom. My father only lost his fortune. I have lost Valentine." "Look at me, Morel," Monte Cristo said, with the solemnity that on certain occasions made him so great and so persuasive. "Look at me. I have no tears in my eyes, or fever in my veins, or dread beatings in my heart, yet I am watching you suffer. You, Maximilien, whom I love as I should my own son. Well, Maximilien, does that not tell you that grief is like life, and that there is always something unknown beyond it? So, if I order you to live, Morel, it is in the certainty that one day you will thank me for saving your life." "My God!" the young man exclaimed. "My God, what are you telling me, Count? Take care. Perhaps you have never been in love?" "Child," the Count replied. "About love," Morel said, "I do understand. You see, I have been a soldier for as long as I have been a man. I reached the age of 29 without ever being in love, because none of the feelings that I experienced up to then deserved the name of love. Then, at 29, I saw Valentine. For almost 2 years I have loved her. For almost 2 years I have been able to read the virtues of womanhood, inscribed by the hand of the Lord on that heart which was as plain to me as a book. Count, for me, with Valentine, there could be an infinite, immense, unknown happiness, a happiness too great, too complete, and too divine for this world. Since this world has not given it to me, Count, that means there is nothing for me on earth except despair and desolation." "I told you to hope, Morel," the Count repeated. "Then I too shall repeat, take care," said Morel, "because you are trying to persuade me. And if you do persuade me, you will make me lose my mind, because you will make me believe I can see Valentine again." The Count smiled. "My friend, my father," Morel cried in exultation, "for the 3rd time I must tell you, take care, because I am terrified at the power you have over me. Beware of the meaning of your words, because my eyes are lighting up again. My heart is being born anew. Beware, or you will make me believe in the supernatural. I should obey if you were to order me to raise the stone of the sepulchre in which the daughter of Jairus is entombed. I should walk on the water, like the apostle, if your hand were to signal to me to step on the waves. Take care, I should obey." "Hope, my friend," the Count repeated. "Oh!" Morel cried, crashing from the highest point of his exultation to the depths of sorrow. "Oh, you are toying with me.
You are like one of those good mothers, or rather like one of those selfish mothers who calm their children's sorrows with honeyed words because they are tired of hearing them cry. No, my friend, I was wrong to tell you to beware. Fear nothing. I shall bury my grief with so much care in the depth of my heart. I shall make it so dark, so secret, that it will not even try your sympathy any more. Farewell, my friend. Adieu.
On the contrary, the Count said, from this moment onwards, Maximilien, you will live near me and with me. You will not leave my side, and in a week we shall have left France.
Do you still tell me to hope?
I do, because I have the means to cure you.
Count, you are making me even sadder, if that were possible. All that you can see after the blow that has struck me is an ordinary grief, which you intend to console by ordinary means, by travel.
And Morel shook his head in contemptuous disbelief. What can I say? Monte Cristo replied. I have faith in what I promise, so let me try the experiment.
Count, you are prolonging my agony, nothing more.
So, feeble spirit that you are, said the Count, you do not even have strength enough to allow your friend a few days for the experiment he is trying. Come, do you know what the Count of Monte Cristo can do? Do you know that he commands many powers on earth? Do you know that he has enough faith in God to obtain miracles from him, who said that if a man has faith he can move mountains? Well, wait for the miracle I am hoping for, or, Morel repeated. Or beware, Morel, I shall call you ungrateful.
Have pity on me, Count.
I do, Maximilien, so much so that if I have not cured you in a month, day for day, hour for hour, do you hear, I shall put you myself in front of those pistols, fully loaded, and a glass of the most deadly of Italian poisons, one more certain and quicker than the one that killed Valentine. Remember that.
Do you promise?
Yes, for I am a man, and I too, as I told you, wished to die. Ever since misfortune has deserted me, I have often dreamed of the delights of eternal sleep.
Oh, surely do you promise me this, Count?
Maximilien asked, intoxicated. Not only do I promise, I swear it, Monte Cristo said, extending his hand.
In a month, on your honour, if I am not consoled, you will leave me free to take my life, and whatever I do, you will not call me ungrateful.
In a month, day for day, Maximilien, in a month to the hour. The date is sacred. I don't know if you have realized, but today is the 5th of September. 10 years ago today, I saved your father, who wanted to die. Morel grasped the Count's hands and kissed them. The Count accepted the homage as if such adoration were his due. In a month, he went on, you shall have, on the table in front of which we shall both be sitting, fine weapons and an easy death. But in exchange, do you promise me to wait until then?
Oh yes, cried Morel. In my turn, I swear it.
Monte Cristo clasped the young man to his heart and held him there for a long time. And now, he said, from this day forth you will come and live with me. You will take Haydée's rooms, and my daughter will at least be replaced by my son.
Haydée?
Morel said.
What has happened to her?
She went away last night.
To leave you?
To wait for me. So be ready to join me in the Champs-Élysées and smuggle me out of here without anyone seeing. Maximilien bent his head and obeyed, like a child or a disciple. And that is where we shall end for tonight.